So this next piece of equipment is a table saw, and this in particular is called a saw stop. So we're going to talk about the particulars of that and what it does and its function in keeping you safe. But we're going to go over how we're going to use this, some of the main parts on this, and then walk you through the process of cutting some material and how to do that safely. So we can do lots of operations on this, but we're mainly going to be doing one in here and perhaps a second, and that primary one is called ripping, where we are taking a board that is this wide and cutting it to a width that we want. Let's say if this is 3 inches and we want to cut this to 2 inches, we can set that up to cut this at 2 inches and take our waste away. The other thing we can do is cross cut, and we can do that with what's called a miter gauge, also a cross cut sled, and that's going to be in a different video on how we're going to do cross cutting with this particular saw, which will be fine. But for now, for our main thing that we're going to be doing as far as ripping material, we're going to be just demonstrating that today. So let's start at the top of the saw. We'll talk about some terms and what they're for and how this all works. So we've got this part, this cast iron part, that's called the table, hence the word table saw. And then inside here we've got our miter gauge slots, and we'll talk about the miter gauge later and if we're going to use it or not. We have our outfeed table, so as the material comes off the table here, it has somewhere to go and stay, and it's safe and out of the way. We also have a side table here. If we're cutting a big sheet of something, it's supported all the way through and supported all the way out to the end. We also have our fence that we can bring in to make a thin cut or bring out to make a thicker cut or a wider cut. And then we've got a lock here to lock it in place so it's nice and tight and secure so we can run our material through. Let's talk about what we have down here below. This is the main part. This is our power to the saw. This should be off and nothing will turn on. This little key should be in there. When you come to the saw, you're going to turn this on, and sometimes you'll just get a green light, sometimes you'll get a green and red flashing light back and forth. When this is solid green, now the power is on, it's ready to go. If I want to turn on the blade, I pull this paddle out. That turns the saw on. When I'm done, I push the paddle in, and that will cut the power and bring the blade to a stop. And I'm always watching this green light. I'll explain that little flashing green light and why it's flashing in a second. You want to wait till it actually goes solid green. This handle here, this controls how high or low the blade is. So if I want to bring that blade up, I can undo this center knob a little bit, go ahead and raise up my blade or lower my blade. Once I have it to where I want, I'm going to just kind of snug that down. It doesn't need to be super tight, but I want to snug it so the blade's not moving up and down. The handle on the left, that controls the angle of my blade, if I want to bring it over or not, and it just lives here. We're not going to be doing any special setups or any angled cuts really in here. That's not something that we need to deal with. So we're going to leave this handle alone. The only handle that we are using is this handle right in front of us to either raise the blade or lower the blade. When you're done with the machine, make sure. Now, also on top, I've got my blade, and then I've got what's called sometimes a splitter, or sometimes called a riving knife. I'm just going to bring this up so you can all see. And then I also have these little anti-kickback contraptions that are spring-loaded here. But the idea is, we're going to talk about kickback in a little bit, but the idea is I do not want my board hitting that back end of the blade and then being propelled towards me. That's called kickback, and that's really, really dangerous. There's videos on YouTube about that. You can see that. But the idea is this riving knife is a little bit wider than that back of that blade. So once I get past the back of the blade into the riving knife, that's a safety feature, so that's going to prevent some kickback. I also, in the back here, have these little claws here, so as I feed this through, these will kind of lock into place and prevent that board from coming back. So that's another safety feature on this. So we're concerned with two main things when it comes to table saws. One is kickback, and that riving knife or splitter is going to help us with that, and also some safe operation as we push this through. The other thing is my hand coming in contact with the blade and me losing some fingers or digits, and I don't want that either. So this particular brand called Saw Stop, it's got some pretty cool technology. It does two things. Should my finger or any part of flesh on my body touch this blade while it is moving, Inside, it has this electronic cartridge, and what it's doing, it's actually sending out a current and can actually measure current from my body touching the blade and through the steel. Okay, and so if it senses that current, what it does, it will launch this big chunk of aluminum into the blade, stopping it instantly. Actually goes that way, stopping the blade almost instantaneously, and it will actually drop the blade down below the table, preventing me from getting a serious injury. I might need a Band-Aid, and no, we're not going to test it out. You can check out the videos on YouTube if you want to see it, and I'll link those as well. But should my hand come in contact with the blade, this drops below the table instantly, and this cartridge launches into the blade, stopping the rotation of the blade at the same time, which is really great. Keeps us really safe, but we still have to follow a certain safety protocol, make sure that we are safe, make sure we're getting a good cut, and so we're going to go through that right now. Now, before we make a cut, we got to check our lumber, make sure that we have a straight edge on one side, make sure it's flat on one side. It shouldn't be super wobbly, it shouldn't be super twisted or bowed or cupped or anything like that, because I need my edge tight against the fence. I don't want it pivoting on the fence at all. It needs to follow the fence from the front of the board all the way to the back of the board. When I push this against the fence, there should be nowhere where I see any light or any gap here. Another thing we want to do is make sure that the board is flat. So one way to test that, just in case, is just push on each corner. If you feel it wobble at all, you know it's not flat somewhere, and we need to get that flat before we start. So we always want a flat edge and a flat face before we start, and that's going to keep us safe. The next thing we want to do is, for our blade height, I don't want to be cutting like this. It's not necessarily. I don't want my blade teeth way higher than my piece of work. In general, I want the gullets, or these gaps between my teeth, to be just at or below the work surface, where I'm seeing maybe 3 or 4 teeth sticking out, and that's as high as I want to go. I can even bring it down a little bit, but I want enough height that it's going to clear out the sawdust. I don't want it just grazing the top of it, but I don't want it so high that I've got a lot of tooth sticking out. I only want maybe 3/8 of an inch or less from the top of my blade to the top of my board. The other thing that's going to keep us safe is, how am I going to put this board through the blade in between my fence? What I like to do is, I like to stand here on the left side of the blade. With one hand, I'm going to hold my board tight against my fence. With the other hand, I'm going to push it from the bottom and slide it through till I'm on top of the table, flip it around, and push it the rest of the way through. I don't want you to get in the habit of holding it here and holding it here on top, because what can happen is, when you're pressing, you're actually going to be doing some of this, and the blade sometimes actually wants to naturally kind of push this up, and I don't want that. So to avoid that, I'm pressing in with this hand, I'm pressing down with this hand, and I'm just pressing from the bottom until I'm on top of the table, and then I'm going to take it all the way through the blade. So if your board is 4 inches or wider, you can do this with no push stick and just use your hands. It's probably more comfortable. If the width is 4 inches or smaller, then we need to use a push stick, and we'll demonstrate that next. So, okay, so we're going to do a sample cut here. I'm going to set this at 7.5 inches. Lock down the fence. Make sure my blade is at the right height. Where I'm standing, I'm going to stand to the left of this, holding it tight against the fence, hand underneath until I hit the table, flip it over. And then what I'm going to do is, as I go through, I am pressing down and pressing in towards the fence simultaneously. It takes a little practice, but you'll get it. Where my hand is here, I'm not like this, my hand is here, and basically what you want is, I don't want my fingers, this is called a throat plate. I don't want my fingers in this zone. I call that the safety zone. Your finger should not be here, here, or here. So with my hand here, I can come all the way up to here with my hand, with my left hand. I don't want my hand up here, but your hand can be anywhere in here on the stainless, okay? Or on the, not stainless, on the cast iron. On this side, as long as you're going through and your hand is not in the red, perfect. Once your hand gets into the red, again, that saw or the fence is 4 inches or closer, we're going to use push sticks, and so we're safe. Okay? So I'm set at 7.5. I'm going to turn the saw on. The other thing that you need to do and take some practice is I'm going to start off on the left side here. I'm never standing here in direct line with the blade. If there's a kickback, it's coming towards me, and that's not good. So when I start, I'm going to start on the left side. I'm going to feed it through. Once I put my hand here, that's a great time to step over to the right, and I'm going to finish that all the way through. That way I am not reaching over the blade like this, and that's a safety issue. We don't want to do that, but that way I can just take that all the way through, and my hand is nice and tight against the fence all the way through the cut. Left side, hands tight, pressure down. I'm going to take it. When I switch to here, my hand is still holding pressure here. I'm holding it tight against the fence, holding it down this way. I switch my hand position. I'm going to take that all the way through. For any piece narrower than 4 inches, I'm going to use a push stick, and I've got a couple examples of push sticks. This one came with a saw. This keeps your hand nice and high above it. It doesn't have a whole lot here, but it works okay. Here's another style. Again, I like something a little bit wider so it feels secure. This kind of wobbles a little bit. This is great, especially if I've got a really thin piece that I need to cut. That works nice. I prefer something like this, where I at least have 3/4 of an inch. That way it's nice and solid on my piece of wood. It's not wobbling. I feel secure, and then I can go ahead and take that all the way through. So similar to our over 4 inches, but when I'm here, again, left hand is here. I can go all the way up to here, but that's my safety zone. So I'm going to stay in here. I'm going to go all the way through. Underhand, I'm going to reach over with my push stick. Here's the trick to this. I'm not just pushing straight. I'm kind of aiming this at the back corner of my fence. That's where I'm kind of directing that pressure, and that's going to keep my piece of wood nice and tight against my fence all the way through. As your board goes through, the goal is always to have this side as tight against the fence as possible. Sometimes, if I'm just going straight with this, what happens is it goes off this way. I mean, I'm over exaggerating how much it's off the fence, but you can see I've got a gap there. Sometimes if it's even very small, that can be a problem, because now I've got a narrower board down there and a wider board down here. I don't want that. I want this nice and parallel all the way through. So you just can't push this straight, because it's going to want to walk towards the blade this way. With my push stick here, I'm always pointing this towards the back of the fence, and I'm maintaining that pressure and pushing down and towards the fence at the same time. That's going to keep my board or my stock nice and tight against the fence, give me a nice parallel cut all the way through. When we are done with our cut, if you have a piece of scrap in here, do not take it out until the blade stops. Don't do anything until the blade stops. This is still active until the blade actually comes to a stop. If it's spinning down and you accidentally touch this, you're going to launch the brake in there, and then we've got a brake that we have to replace. They're not cheap, but they're going to save your fingers. So you have to wait until this blade comes to a complete stop. Then we can go ahead and remove our material. Okay? Also, if you happen to go through and something gets stuck, you want to make sure that you don't pull it back, because that will actually lock the material. You need to feed it all the way through the cut. Also, when you are making a cut, if something should bind up or something sounds weird, smells weird, feels weird, do not try and move the piece away or out. Just keep it in its place. Keep your left hand here and your right hand here, and take your leg, and you're going to hit that safety stop with your leg and shut it down. Don't try and manipulate this board or do something different with it other than pushing it all the way through what it's designed for because if you do that, you're eventually going to end up with an accident or a problem because you're doing something to this that's not intended for. And if it's making a noise, if it's creating a smell, if it's creating a sound that it doesn't sound right, doesn't feel right, doesn't smell right, hold your board in place with your leg, hit that safety stop, wait till it comes to complete stop, and then we'll see what's going on. We can, listen, hey, wood grows on trees, as a buddy of mine says. We can get more. Don't worry about it if you mess up your board. We can always get another one, but your safety is paramount and is priority number one. So just shut it down, hold it in place, hit it with your leg, shut it down. A couple other things that you need to be mindful of and be aware of. One, if you've got wood that has a knot in it like this, you do not want to run the blade through that knot. If this becomes dislodged or loose, that blade can actually launch this knot back at you with tremendous force and tremendous speed, and that's not good. If you're cutting wood and you find that it's split like this, we're not running the blade through wherever that split is. We're not doing that. It needs to be solid. It needs to be all together. We're not doing this business. Okay? Please do not do that. Again, I always, as I run this through, I always have a hand, at least one hand on here. I am never taking one hand off, or when I'm here, somehow I'm doing this and doing this. I'm always in control either with my left hand or right hand or both hands. But there's not a time where I have no hands. That's a bad day. One more thing. I'm never freehanding this. I'm not doing this action where I'm just kind of working it through and doing this. I've seen that with some contractors. Really bad idea. You need to be in control of this where I've got all that pressure against the fence, or if I'm doing a cross cut, I'm using that miter gauge. And again, I'm not going to touch on miter gauge right now or the cross cut. That's going to be a different video, but I always have tension on that cross cut and I always have it secure. I am not running boards this way, where I am running the end along my fence and making any cuts like this. That's also super dangerous. I don't want to see anybody doing that. And so please be aware of that we are not running it this way. Can it cut across the grain with this blade? This blade is designed to do that, but this is not the type of setup that we would use where I have this on its end and going across this way. This is only designed to be going along with the grain as I make my cut. When you are done with your cut, make sure all your scrap is cleared out. Make sure, obviously, that your blade is at a stop before you take out these pieces. Again, make sure it's stopped. You're responsible for throwing these away, getting them off the table, clearing out your material. Also, your job, unless someone's going to make the same exact cut, you want to go ahead and lower that blade all the way back down below the table so it's ready to go. It's safe. No one's going to come up here and accidentally turn it on and they're going to have an issue. This guard is going to live down like this, and no, you can't see the blade, but it's okay. The main part is this riving knife, this splitter, and these anti-kickback little claws here to keep you safe. This is more for dust collection than anything else. It's not really a safety feature per se. Also, make sure that all your scraps are taken off the table. Make sure all the scraps around the table are off the ground, because that's also your responsibility, so the next person coming up doesn't slip, trip, do anything because you left something on the ground. You're responsible for anything you cut. You're responsible for cleaning it up and making sure it's ready to go for whoever's going to use this next.